Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Next 2020. My name's Gabriela Heizer. I'm the host of this show for the Boca Raton Tribune. I want to welcome everyone who's here again or for the first time. We're glad to have you watching the show. Today we have great guests. We're going to be talking to teachers and talking about their life in front of the classroom. So we have a co-host. We have Austin Canonico with us. He was here on our very first show, so it's nice having him back. Hi, Austin.
Hey, Gabby. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we have our two guests. We have Sammy.
Hey.
Hey. And hey, there you go.
Hi.
Hi, guys. How are you guys?
Doing well. How are you?
Good.
Doing good on this beautiful Wednesday.
I love it. That's awesome. So to get us started, let's go around. And if you guys could please tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you teach, what grade you teach, and how long you've been teaching. Sorry, Johnna, why don't you start?
All right. I teach 5th grade at Devonshire Elementary in Charlotte, North Carolina. I teach literacy specifically, and I'm going into my 3rd year teaching.
That's what's up. My name is Sammy Rigaud. I teach 2nd grade downtown Atlanta, reading and social studies, as you can see by the beautiful map that is behind me. And I have been teaching for 6 years.
That's great. And Austin, if you want to talk a little bit about you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabby. I suppose it makes sense for me to be here on this teacher edition because I've been an adjunct professor of marketing at Florida Atlantic University and also Nova Southeastern University for over 3 years now.
That's awesome. So we have a little bit of everything. You know, I think this is going to be a great show, great conversation, and get different outlooks both on age-wise and different cities. I think this is going to be awesome. Very enlightening conversation, I hope. So let's get started. What inspired you to become a teacher? Sammy, why don't we start with you since you've been teaching a little bit longer?
I actually got called into teaching after kind of like a troubled past I had when I was a kid. I had just been getting in trouble as a youth, and one of my probation officers kind of gave me the choice to do community service, and they set me up at a YMCA. And while I was there, I just fell in love with, the influence and how I learned how impressionable, our youth are. And I just wanted to take my life and really use all my skills for good. And so I've been doing that ever since.
That's amazing.
And I have wanted to teach since I was 5. It's kind of like one of those jobs that young people decide that they want, but I never stopped wanting it. I grew up and I remember teachers actually telling me, like, don't teach, you can make more money, you can get more respect somewhere else. And it was just something that I couldn't shake. And so I ended up going to college for teaching and joining Teach for America and moving to Charlotte.
That's amazing. Austin, do you want to add in?
Absolutely. If you had to pick a favorite aspect of being a teacher, what would it be and why?
I'll go. I think for me, the best part I like the most is just the connection with the kids. I see myself as a big kid, and there's a quote that I live by. It says, "Be who you needed when you were younger." So I always try to really connect with the kids in my classroom.
That's great.
I like that expression a lot. What about you, Johnna?
I was going to say, Sammy, I had a feeling we were going to say something along the same lines, but relationships with kids is absolutely the best part of the job. And I think about like now during remote learning, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, that's the hardest part of this because so many teachers go into the profession and their favorite part is interacting with kids.
Yes, it's certainly been a challenge that we've all been facing, but I'm sure that you have multiple strategies that we'll discuss about how you've been able to make that connection still.
I think it's also really important because looking back once you're out of school, I think looking back especially, and you remember like, wow, I had those teachers that really made a huge difference in my life. And you guys are so right. It's so important, teachers. So kudos to you guys. I know I could never do it. I was talking before the show, like I'm very sensitive, so I feel like if the kid were to tell me something, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to tell you to do your homework. So you guys are awesome. So now that we talked a little bit about that, do you think that once you got into your career of teaching, it's what you imagined it would be? Johnna's smirking.
Sammy, do you want to start?
Yes, I think for me, the biggest, I didn't really know what to expect. So like my first year, I had went in and did kindergarten for half a year, and which was the craziest thing ever. And then I threatened to leave the profession altogether if they put me at kinder again. So they put me at first, and I had all the same kids I had the year before. And but I just remember like the first day I walked in, you know what I mean? Everybody put their backpacks on the wall, and it was like, I closed that door and I'm like, oh snap, I'm a teacher now. Like their parents are coming back at 3:30. I don't know. But I think for me, it was really tough to kind of like map out the day, because it really is a long day, and it's not what I expected. I'll put it that way.
I think it's hard to know what to expect, and I think that there are so many different parts of the job that go untaught when you're studying education. Like we talk a lot about pedagogy and theory and classroom management, but when you're there and you have to teach, and you're trying to teach effectively, right? You're managing classroom, you're communicating with parents, and then you have all of these acronyms, and you're dealing with IEPs and 504s and students with exceptionalities, and you're trying to balance all of these things that you weren't told you were going to have to do, and you're trying to do it well. And so it's super overwhelming and of course rewarding. But I think that my first year, I realized, like I went back and I thanked all my old teachers, because I was like, I had no idea what y'all did for us. And I don't think you ever do know until you're in that position and you're teaching.
I have kind of a fun question for you. Right now we're in the summer, and we would be doing some lesson planning and getting prepared for the first day of school eventually coming up in the fall. What are some traditions or maybe even superstitions that you have from your experience on the first day of school, if any?
I'll go for it. I think one of the things I always do is I never fill out the name tags, right? Just because in the beginning, you probably know, Johnna, like your roster can change up until the last minute. Up until that first day, you might have like 3 new kids switch or whatnot. So it's like I always make sure that I just leave them blank and leave no names on them, just to make sure. Yeah.
Teachers are also often told on the first few weeks of school not to smile. It's like, yeah, it's this huge thing. And I'm sure it's probably different from grade to grade, but we're really encouraged to like be super strict, because the thing is, if you set high expectations, you can always get more lenient as time goes on. But if you start with not having a lot of expectations, the thought is students will take advantage of that and you won't have strong classroom management.
Oh.
But I don't ascribe to that at all, right? I have high expectations, but it's always like, I want to love you from the moment you walk into my classroom. I don't need to scare you. And so I just thought that was always really weird. Like people are like, don't smile the first few weeks. And so I kind of intentionally do the opposite.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be very challenging, especially if you already love working with children and seeing smiles on their faces. It would be tough not to smile back, but very interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I need to be scary to earn respect, but that's just.
I'm trying to like think back. Did my teacher smile or not? So, are there any? So now that we're like talking about the kids and stuff, are there any embarrassing teaching moments that you're willing to share? You both look like you're thinking.
I don't know that I have anything that actively embarrasses me, but I often embarrass my kids.
Oh.
like I'll dance or I'll sing, and they're like, I have fifth graders, so they're like, please stop, like don't do that. And of course I don't care, which bothers them even more. So I'm like embarrassing like to my kids, but I don't think I've ever done anything that I'm like hanging my head for.
Right.
I have when you teach the younger ones, primary, like you have those like everybody listen to me moments, you know? And like I remember one year, the first grade year, the year that I had everybody move up with me, I had like this kid who was like just like he ate anything, like anything you can find. Jeez. And one day I was like, hey, get over here. What's in your hand? Put it in my hand. And it was like a chewed up worm that he had been like chewing for the day. And like, I was like, yeah, I got to go home. Like, everybody go on the computer. We're done learning today.
I just want to make it clear that this is why I teach older children.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm glad that we do have teachers that are teaching different age students, because I've always wondered, teaching college age students, how much I missed out learning about teaching younger students. So regardless of the age of the students that you're teaching, what is some advice that you have for prospective teachers, or maybe people that are just starting out in the profession from your years of experience now? What would be your advice to either a prospective teacher or somebody that's just getting started?
Good question.
So this is a conversation that I've had with a lot of teachers. Like I said, I'm in Teach for America. So I studied education. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, but that's not always the case for Teach for America core members. And so when that's not the case and you come into your first year of teaching, that can be super overwhelming. And we've found that the people who had the strongest first years also tended to have the strongest relationships with students. And I think that comes from being fully authentic with kids. That goes for any age, right? Kindergarten through high school. Kids know when you're being genuine and when you're showing who you are, and they're going to love you for that more than any like commonalities that you might have. And so that would be my suggestion, is like being fully authentic and fully yourself with your students and really striving to form those relationships.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Real quick, John, before Sammy answers the question, what is Teaching for America? It's just in case someone doesn't know.
Oh, yeah. So Teach for America is an organization that places incoming teachers into Title I schools across the country with the idea that all kids one day will attain an excellent education. And so the goal is, oftentimes we see differences in achievement, what we call the achievement gap, in schools that tend to be low income, predominantly with students of color. And Teach for America is like striving actively to close that and to make it so that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so it brings in people from all different sectors to teach in order to facilitate that.
Awesome. That's great.
For me, I kind of have like a checklist or like a hierarchy of what to really focus on. First, I put the kids first. Unlike any other job, the kids are the first. It's not really about impressing different people to move up a ladder. It's really all about serving and really, high quality serving these kids. So I have the kids first. Then I put their parents right after, just because if you have good relationship with parents, I found that is really the secret. That is really the secret. If you have parents on your side, then you're just teaming up to better serve the students each day. And then third, I put kind of like your co-teachers, people you work with. I didn't really think it was that important. I didn't know, as a student when I was a kid, I didn't know that, teachers hung out with each other, or teachers helped each other, or relied on each other, or traded resources, borrowed books, covered breaks. You didn't really know that. You kind of just thought your classroom was it. And as I've gotten to teaching, I realized that you really, really depend a lot on your teaching group and your team and those around you.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love your first point about putting the kids first, because I remember, like, when I was like in elementary school and stuff, I would always think, oh, the teacher's acting different when like a supervisor would come in or something. So I really, it's a great point. Austin, do you have another question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate those responses. I think that there would be times when it would be challenging to stay genuine, and it would be tough to keep your composure together, whatever you're dealing with outside of work, and then the stresses within the classroom. And then also, Sammy, like you said, trying to develop a relationship with parents and make that connection. I think that that's absolutely integral, because we also recognize how important parents are in the development of students, and how learning at home is a big component as well. Going along with maybe some of the challenges that we may face, have you ever experienced burnout in this role? And how did you overcome those feelings? How did you not let your students see that? And what are maybe some of the methods you've developed over time to prevent or assuage feeling burnt out or stressed out while teaching?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you never feel burnt out and you guys are just perfect.
No, I mean, I've only been in this for 2 years, so I wouldn't use burnout, but there are definitely times where it gets really difficult, right? And I would say more often than not, it has nothing to do with the kids, and it's just how overwhelming the job is in itself, and that the kids are really what, I kind of use them to remind myself of why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think that in teaching, so often we don't take care of ourselves. Teachers usually are really empathetic and giving people, which is wonderful, and that's who you want in those roles, but often spend so much of their time giving and having other people in mind that we don't take care of ourselves, and you can't help someone if you haven't helped yourself already. So what I've tried to be more intentional about doing is just, self-care. In North Carolina, I'm super close to the mountains, and so sometimes it just takes like a weekend or even like a day trip of like going and hiking and being somewhere else to be able to come back refreshed, which is good for me and my students.
Mm-hmm.
Sage advice.
I think for me, when it comes to like burnout, it's usually like Johnna said, like it's probably like admin and their expectations. I think sometimes they're unrealistic, and but the part that really gets me is like some days it'll be like 2:00 and it would have rained, and you guys are inside on a time where the kids haven't been able to run outside and let out some energy, and everyone just feels like the day ending, and it's like a Thursday. I feel like those are the times where you just kind of have to overpower those tired emotions and just like push through. And sometimes we don't, sometimes I'll pull the kids I teach the younger ones, so it's a lot easier. I'll pull them and say, hey, listen, like your teacher is tired. You guys are tired. You're not giving me the energy you were giving me at 11. Let's take a 5-minute turn off the light break or something, or let's watch this clip and everyone laugh, or let's have a dance break or something like that. So it's really the daily burnouts that really get to us.
Yeah.
Love that idea. I wish I had more teachers that did stuff like that. But I do remember teachers that would incorporate breaks or fun activities or exercises. And really just when you get back to learning, you feel refreshed and kind of now you're ready to take it on again. So I love that.
I think if my teachers had dance breaks, I might have been a better dancer. So people need to incorporate that. So real quick, I know you guys were talking about like being authentic and building that relationship with your kids, but how do you really build that relationship? Like, what do you do actively to do that?
I try to really like dig in to find out what their interests are. Like, I'll see which kids are into sports, which kids are into dance, gymnastics, music. I'll try to really sit with them and ask questions and just interview them randomly to find out what they're interested in, and then incentivize that and have them earn working on that. For example, I had a girl who loves cooking, 2nd grade girl. She loved cooking. And I would say, hey, listen, if we can get this amount of work done, then hey, on Fridays during your free time while the other kids are either rapping or dancing or something, you can get to bring like, a juicer, and you can make juice for the class, and it really incentivize their interest and hang it over their head and watch. And they usually, excel when they are challenged like that with something they're interested in.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
I agree with everything that Sammy said, and I would say I do really similar things. I'd also say that teachers often feel like there has to be this separation between you and the kids. I think the best relationships are, like I said, when you're authentic. And a lot of that means that you're letting them know who you are. And so my kids actually know a ton about me. And sometimes that's in line with what they like, and sometimes it's not, and it doesn't really matter. DaBaby is a rapper from Charlotte. My students love him. I also listen to him. So we'll put on like a clean DaBaby song in the morning, and that's a way of like me bonding with them. But I'm also vegan, and none of my students are vegan, but we have conversations about like what I eat and what I don't eat and why. And they'll like check the labels of things, and they like have made games out of it, and they ask me questions all the time. And so just even like them knowing me better, the same way that I want to know them better, allows them to feel like this isn't a one-sided relationship, but that we really are like connected, and that we know each other, and that we love each other, instead of it's just me telling you that you're good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really like and appreciate that. I could think back to teachers that did make me feel like I had more of input, or I felt a little more valued in that way. So I think that that's a really effective strategy. I love that. Now, I have a question for challenges for students specifically. I wish that all students had the same access to education and they had the same experience, but obviously there are some disparities in the types of experiences that students have within their education. So from your experiences in the classes that you've taught, what are some of the academic barriers that you've discovered or noticed? And what do you think that we can do to make that better for those students? I know that's a big question, but just from your observations, what are some of those academic barriers that you've seen that have made it challenging for some students?
Throughout this COVID pandemic, like our last day was March 12th. Like we walked out of the classroom March 12th, and I haven't been back since, not even to clean out my room or anything. I learned as we went to virtual learning that, you know, in this country, you know, I teach in an area that is a Title I school, a at-risk area, a lower economic area. And, you know, in this country, the way it's presently set up moving forward, if you do not reach or have a certain amount of income, it is more difficult for you to learn. The way we have moved everything to digital and to virtual, you know, a lot of my students struggle with that. You know, I had students, you know, using their parents' phone as a hotspot. You know, I had kids submitting things on their phone. I had all these kind of things. And I think one of the things Atlanta Public Schools did or was thinking about doing was they had the school buses with Wi-Fi routers on them. And they were going to send them out into communities and leave them there and have the kids have access to that. So I think moving forward, it's a question we all have to think about is the role of internet. And if we're asking kids to use it, there has to be a kind of like a streamline to even out the playing field.
Yeah.
Yeah, viewing internet as more of a utility rather than an option, because it's impossible for us to function without it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Austin, you said it was a big question, and I agree. I also think that it's a really important question, and I'm glad that it's one that y'all are asking on this show. I would say there are two unique barriers other than, and there are plenty more, but I'll speak to two, other than what Sammy already stated, which is also an issue in Charlotte. One, I have students who, like 60% of our school are Spanish speaking as a primary language, and that's their parents' primary language. And so obviously we know that speaking another language has no impact on your intelligence. However, it does have an impact on your performance in school when school's in English. And so trying to support all students when I don't speak Spanish fluently and we don't have the resources that allow for strong translations is really difficult. But we also know that there's a range of English language learners. And so trying to reach the needs of every student is difficult. Something that I also think that often goes unnamed is teacher bias. And I know that we talk a lot about bias, especially in the current state of our country right now, but teacher bias is not new. and also teaching in a low socioeconomic status. 97% of my students are Black or other students of color. And the way that we perceive them and the way that we will water down curriculum because we don't think our students are capable, the language that we use surrounding our students is not something that I've seen across the board at all schools, but I do predominantly see it at Title I and Redline schools. And that has a huge impact on achievement, right? Like if I'm setting the bar for you here, even if you hit here, you're still up here. But if I set the bar down here, there's almost no way for you to exceed that and to achieve at a certain level. And I think that it's something that needs to be named. I think that we need more PD around it across the country. And I think that it's a huge issue in education today.
I agree. I think that the professional development there's a massive need for it. And a lot of times people think about the struggles that adults go through. But if children are set up for failure, the rest of their lives are in question. And that's what I think it's incredibly important that we really focus at a very young age is supporting all children to give them a fair chance. So I really thank you both for those responses. That's very insightful.
Yeah, that's amazing. Also, real quick, if anyone watching the show has a question as well, please feel free to write it in the comments and we'll be glad to answer them on the show. So with everything you guys just said about issues you see, how do you think we can combat some of those issues?
One of the things that Johnna kind of mentioned about the PD. So I'm actually teaming up with a couple professional development programs for teachers where I'm teaching equity, a lot of equity programs and how to, one, look at a curriculum and see, hey, is this fair curriculum? Is it equitable across the board? And especially with literature, I know in the primary and secondary, children aren't getting stories of children that look like them or characters that look like them or speak like them or anything really. And a lot of these inner city kids are getting text about things that they have no clue, they'll never experience within the next 10 years. So there is a huge disconnect in that. So I've teamed up with a couple of professional development programs that are kind of training teachers. And what's cool about that is now that we're doing virtual and a lot of schools won't have your traditional in-person PD, they're assigning these online workshops. And I'm glad that I kind of get to be a part of that. And it's a big work just because, it's something that has always, like Johnna said, always existed, but we're now finally taking a closer look at it. So, yeah.
Sammy, we'll have to connect about that later because I think that's super important. The value of diverse books. And again, not even just books that you see yourself in, which Black students altogether, there are not enough of, but just all kinds, a range of abilities, sexuality, family circumstances, race, ethnicity, all of these different things, because so often book characters are both parents, white, very standard storyline. When I'm thinking about challenges and solutions, I think that, I spoke to the fact that my school is comprised of 97% Black students and other students of color. And if we look at that statistic, that's basically resegregation of schools, right? We're in the high 90th percentile, and that's not uncommon, especially for redlined Title I, low socioeconomic status schools. And it's an injustice. And Charlotte was known as the city that made desegregation work. It was desegregation, they did busing, and it was the model across the country. But as it was kind of decided, it happened, and then we stopped regulating it. And so now we've gotten back to this. And, we can look at education for that, and education for sure plays a factor, but it's really, and we're seeing this everywhere. It's systemic racism throughout our entire country. And those practices have influenced everything, and it's not going to be solved with just education. I'm thinking about housing. If we don't have neighborhoods that are diverse and schools are neighborhood schools, you're not going to have schools that are diverse in any sense of the word. And so there's a lot that needs to happen. We need to look at our housing practices. We need to look at the rate of upward mobility. Charlotte is 50 out of 50 in the nation's largest cities in terms of upward mobility, meaning if you are born poor, you're probably going to stay poor. And if you're born rich, you're probably going to be able to stay there. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that need to change before we'll actually start seeing those large scale changes in schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like it's a much bigger problem that needs to be fixed. But what is one way that like teachers can be better assisted to help, combat the issues other than like the big like systemic racism and things like that?
So I think like Sammy said, when we're working with like when we're thinking about equity, right? Because that has to be at the center of all of our work. We have to think about how we're teaching and how we're coming into the classroom. And I spoke earlier to watering down curriculum, and I'll give you an example. If I'm teaching point of view for 5th grade, the standard is, how does point of view influence our understanding of the text? So my students should be able to say, if it's from first person, we might get more of their insights and emotions. And if it's in third person, we understand what's happening, but we might not get all of their thoughts, right? If I'm not holding my kids to those expectations and I'm just reteaching them what first person and what third person is, I'm not doing them justice, and that's not equity, and it's not standards aligned. So I think being reflective in our practices, both with the biases we hold and the expectations that we hold in our classrooms, is something that we can do to personally take responsibility for the achievement of our students.
Yeah, I think what you're explaining makes a lot of sense. And there's a quote in the movie Boys in the Hood at the end where Doughboy looks up and he goes, it's either they don't know what's going on over here or they don't care. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times that's what happens in the classroom. It's like a lot of the teachers, it's either they don't know or they know and they don't care. So the first thing I always try to do with teachers that I work with on my team is I bring these kind of issues up. I try to show the discrepancies of, hey, let's look at our whole grade level and who scores where. And let's look for trends. Let's look for who are our high performing students. Can we automatically figure out something? Does the data tell us something? Who are our lower ones? Do all the lower ones, are they bus riders? Are they walkers? And just find different trends like that. And I think if teachers who are aware really, really try to make a difference, that's why you're in this profession. At the end of the day, it's, you're a teacher, you teach students. And if you can see what they need and you care enough, it's evident. And I think as we talk about with students in the relationships, students can tell when the teacher doesn't care about them. And students can tell when a teacher is not for them or is not an ally. So I think my 6 years, I've always tried to make it an imperative to go out and become an ally for the student and try to make, those kind of connections that'll help. And I think the answer is it's all up to the teacher.
Wow, that was such great knowledge you guys just dropped.
Yeah, I love it. Very, very deep and profound as well. And I do think it's very commendable to say that the teacher has so much of the opportunity to make a difference there. But like we're talking about, it's not just teachers. It can't only be left to teachers. There's so much more that needs to be done. And having very candid conversations about it is a good step in the right direction, because some people are either in denial or, like you said, Sammy, they don't care. So they're either ignorant or they're in denial or don't care, this and that. And we need more people to just be on board and be all doing the right things. So we have ways to go, but having these conversations and then acting on it is critical. And I think that we're making steps in the right direction, but we have a long hill to climb.
Yeah.
Speaking of obstacles, and maybe some of what we just talked about is really going to come into play with this conversation, but we've obviously transitioned due to the pandemic to online learning. What has that been like for you? How has the transition been converting curriculum over to online? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about what that's been like thus far and what it's looking like for you moving into the fall semester as well, or the start of school.
I despise online virtual teaching. I think, you can go to college and learn how to be an online teacher. They have courses for that. And I didn't sign up for that. But I did sign up to serve kids to the utmost of my ability. So here we are today. One of the things that the obstacles have just been kids not having internet, kids not having computers, kids not being able to do any intervention, or teachers not being able to do any intervention and teaching things to reteach, getting that one-on-one time, getting the proximity. There's a way you can teach in closer proximity that you can't teach over the World Wide Web. There's also, you don't have the ability to plan with your other teachers. I've gotten more emails from March to May than I have in probably 2-3 years combined, just because everybody's sending, things like that. So I think the tough part has been the students not having that access. And I learned right off the bat, the kids who do have not as many children in the house did better. The children or the students that had, bigger houses did better. Parents who had jobs that were able to do work from home that weren't essential workers, those children did better. So it's a lot of those were a lot of the struggles that we saw right off the bat, March 12th.
And a lot of the disparities we just mentioned, they convalesce. So if your family's an essential worker, that makes it tougher on you. They have to be out. And then as well, we think a lot of times it's like our student is at home, but their whole family is likely home too. So if you have a large family, now everyone is competing for Wi-Fi or technology and just trying to do work in crammed spaces, or when you're not necessarily by yourself, or those are challenges as well. How about you, Johnna?
I mean, everything that you both said sums it up. I'm seeing those same trends. Students who were so invested in their work in class, some of them really dropped off during online learning. And it's a difficult balance between calling parents and saying, hey, your child's not doing work, but also respecting that we're in the middle of a global pandemic that no one has gone through, and that I'm not trying to add any stress to you, right? Like, I don't have kids. And I mean, bless anyone who has kids right now during this, because I don't know how they do it. And I know we're talking about how strong teachers are because parents are having trouble teaching at home, but I mean, that's a hard job. And then, if you're working on top of that, I have students who it's a single mom and she has 5 kids, and she's trying her best to make sure that they're all doing their work, but they don't want to do their work, and she's not there. She's working. And so how much am I going to write her back about that? Right? Like how many times am I going to call her? And I'm going to keep her updated, because parents deserve to know their child's progress. But it's been a balance between holding students accountable and respecting that this is a really difficult time. But something about what Sammy said earlier made me laugh. We had a debate in one of my college classes about if we thought online learning, because there's Florida Virtual School, if we thought that online learning would eventually take over a brick and mortar classroom. And I was like, that'll never happen, right? And if it does, I'm quitting. Like, that's not for me. I felt the same way, Sammy. I was like, I could teach online and I don't want to. Like that, you can't hug a kid online. Like it's so different. No disrespect to anyone who teaches online. You're also amazing. But so and then this happened, and it just seems like there's a good chance that we go back next year also remote, or at least partially remote. So we're just holding out till when this is done.
I'll say this though. I sent out a tweet that kind of went viral throughout it all, just because I would just be very frustrated and just sound off online. And I put one that I did like a weekly, like I really tried. I said, all right, you guys got a week and a half to do all these assignments. Okay. And I kept sending reminders. And then the same 6 students that have stability at home turned it in within the first 2 days. And then the rest of them went. And I'm like, guys, I'm going to be tough. I'm going to do this. I'm going to really grade you. I'm going to hold you to this. You guys are going to. And then the next day went by and only those 6 were there. And at the end, I'm like, man, I'm grading privilege. Like I'm grading the parents. I'm at this point, I'm grading the parents and their economic standpoint, and I didn't find that fair. So I kind of had to just become way more lenient. And then what's crazy is I had one student, probably the last 2 days of school, she turned in all her assignments at like 2 a.m. She turned in probably 30 something assignments and they were all right. And then she sent me an email. She's like, Mr. Rigaud, I'm using my mom's Wi-Fi box. And I don't even know what that means, but she turned it all in and got it all right. And I just had to override it and go, hey, you completed the work and you get the credit for it.
Yeah, I think it's also really important in this conversation is to recognize the age differences in students too. I have fifth graders and they already knew how to make a copy of a Google document and name it after themselves and share it with me. That was something that I made sure everyone knew before we went remote. We did that all year long. There was no excuse for someone not to know that. They are on Chromebooks every single day. So my students are actually pretty autonomous. If they want to do their work, they can. And of course, there are other barriers. But when you get into those lower grades, kindergarten, first, second grade, they're entirely dependent on their parents. And so I think in all scenarios with remote learning, we're grading privilege and access. But I think especially at those grades where we're so dependent on parents facilitating learning for their kids, it provides just another barrier.
Yeah. And what are some ways that you guys kept your students engaged during this time?
We had a lot of Zoom. Like I learned how to have a dance party on Zoom. So I would have like my DJ software. I'd split the screen and then they'd get to see me move things and whatnot. So we'd have that once a week. We had show and tells. I tried to keep a lot of the joy factor that we had in the classroom somehow virtually. We had fashion show type things. We did a lot of things to where we like tried to still have them feel connected, because that was one of the big things my classroom has and will always thrive on is I try to have everybody feel connected no matter what your skill set background is. I try to have you bring it to our class and show it. And as long as you respect the others, you could bring yours. That's our rule. So those are some of the things we try to do.
Yeah. You should have told me. I would have told you to bring your DJ set,
Yeah, so I gave students a lot of options with synchronous and asynchronous learning. Synchronous meaning that they're online with me, and asynchronous meaning that they could do it during their own time. Again, knowing that fifth graders are relatively autonomous, at least my students are. But sometimes it was as simple as like we would finish a lesson online and I'd be like, all right, guys, if we don't have anything else, I'm going to wrap it up. And they'd be like, no, please, can we just stay on? And so there were a couple times where like for an hour after class ended, I'd be like reading a book and they'd be watching TV or doing their work that they had to do for another class or playing with their dog. And we literally just sat on Zoom and we wouldn't talk. Sometimes we would, but like we wouldn't talk. We would all just be on Zoom in our own space, but it felt like we were together. And they loved that. Just like feeling like we could be in that same space. And then we also figured out how to do Zoom movie nights. So yeah, on like Friday nights, a few times we all logged on and then I would share a screen and we'd watch a movie together and talk about it afterwards. We watched Wall-E for Earth Day. It was so much fun.
Good pick.
I love it. You have to find ways to get creative with online learning, and it's a huge challenge. But any way that we can make those connections and put people together. And when the pandemic first started, I know I was really reluctant to think that socials via Zoom would work, but it's amazing how people are just longing for that connection that we were so used to getting on a day-to-day basis. So I really commend both of you for, despite not loving online learning, loving teaching and loving your students and doing whatever you could to possibly provide them with the best possible experience. So I have a personal question for you. I think that it's appropriate as we're getting toward the end of the programming here. what are some goals that you have, maybe the next 3 years as a teacher or within your career as an administrator or faculty member? What are some of your goals in the next 3 years, and how are you going to go about achieving them? It's like a job interview question.
It's funny because I've recently developed a 5-year plan. I'm trying to take every opportunity that comes my way. I was telling Gabby and Sammy earlier, I'm currently interning for the associate superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. He's also the chief academic officer. And so that's been incredible. I have a fellowship with Teach for America, and we'll be working with community partners and mentoring teachers next summer. But within the next 3 years, I do plan on getting my master's. There's a principal pipeline program that prepares educators to become principals, and so I'll get my master's in leadership. But I'm not in a rush at all to leave the classroom. I just know that there are issues, right? Like when I'm teaching, I teach 3 blocks this year, or I taught 3 blocks this year. I had a total of 72 students. I have only those 72 students, and I fully believe in my ability to impact and the importance of that, right? Like I don't want to at all diminish the impact that I can have in the classroom, but knowing that there are issues that teachers can't impact, like we talked about earlier. It seems like the higher up you go, the more overall control you have, but the less interactions you have with students. So again, not at all rushing to get out of the classroom. I love being in the classroom and I love teaching. I also see some things that I need to change or that need to change, and I have confidence in my ability to go forth and attempt to do that. So eventually I would like to become a principal, yeah.
Neat. I'm confident you'll get there.
Similar with me, I just got my master's in ed leadership. Thank you. I had the virtual graduation, the virtual ceremony. But I do plan on, I like how Johnna said it, like I'm not in a huge rush to per se leave the room just because, there is that intimacy that you have when you have your classroom and you have your set of students. But I do believe ultimately to make the most amount of impact, you need people with sound minds in administration. So that's one of the things. I also want, and I've gotten my feet wet in it, I also want to work with curriculums. I want to be able to, I have a very diverse upbringing. I've lived in all kind of areas. I've traveled this country, seen 40 states out of 50, and really have touched the ground and have learned just so much about people that I want to be able to really have, my hands on curriculum and really try to make it more equitable across the board for all learners. I think, and that's something, that kind of fell in my lap through the notoriety I've received, but I do want to do that a lot more. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I feel like the best administrators, principals, superintendents, they were quality teachers because they have that empathy of what it's like to actually be around students. And I really respect that you're not trying to, while that's a goal, you're not trying to jump there. You want to really value your time with your students. And then I think that that'll just make you even more incredible administrators moving into the future.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. You guys are rock star teachers. I think this was a great conversation we had today. And I know you both are going to do great things. So I'm thank you so much for being on this show today and having these hard conversations that are needed,
Yeah, thank you both so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Of course. And we have a comment. This is great insight, Taryn says. So good job, guys. I loved it.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we also wanted to say if you wanted to share any social media handles or anything, that way any of the people that tuned in today maybe want to follow you, check out some of those awesome tweets, Sammy, or just check in on maybe it's a fellow teacher, somebody that just wants to see Because I know a lot of teachers nowadays with social media, they'll post things about what's going on in their classroom. And I always love seeing something like that, because sometimes our news feed is filled with things that make us feel down or depressed. And we need to see a lot of it, but to see what's going on in a classroom and smiling students here and there, I think it's really inspiring for everyone. So we wanted to give you the opportunity, if you think it's appropriate, to share. That way people can connect with you further and keep in touch with you over the years.
Absolutely. My all my handles are at Sammy Rigaud. And I mean, like you said, I try to do my best to show what we do in our room. And a lot of times it's helpful for me because I'm able to go back and look at it and be like, wow, like that was a great day. We had a burnout, but that 5-minute dance battle was epic. And I think, like you said, people see that and they relate to it because, it's genuine. It's genuine joy, and you relate to it. So it's at Sammy Rigaud on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, all that jazz.
I talked to Gabby about this earlier. I'm not quite hip with the posting. I do have a class for Instagram. I have it private and it's for my students. It's our little secret. And I don't have a Twitter, which I know I'll probably get some flack for.
Well, it's all good. I respect that.
But I will say I also love watching the videos. When I found out that I was going to be on here with you, Sammy, I did scroll through your Instagram a little bit, and seeing you interact with students just like made my whole heart like warm.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, I mean, if anyone has anything else they want to add, or if anybody watching has a comment, now would be the time.
Maybe we can just give Sammy and Johnna, if you have any like parting words or something that you want to leave, like any sort of message that you have, either for teachers, students, or anyone out there. You've already covered so many great things, and we're very appreciative for your time and the effort that you put into this. But if you had anything else that you wanted to kind of leave, we do have some time for the floor to be yours.
I'll say this because this is like I've been, thinking about this the last 2 months. I think everybody can see a problem and everybody can hear about a problem, but it's like, how can I help with this? So I think if you're a parent out there, or you're not a parent and you're like, man, I didn't know those kind of things are happening in schools. How can I help? I think the first thing is, do your best to bring any resource you think is helpful. Try your best to do that. You can go to any of these charter schools with cases of water. Hey, I saw a sale at Publix and here are, 5 cases of water for a field day, or for any kind of thing like that. Even if it's not the school that your students go to or your child goes to, you never know what resources you can use that can help other surrounding schools or schools that are in tougher areas that lack those resources. Also, try your best to volunteer. I think solidarity at this time is really at a premium. Like, that's what we really need. And I think if we just swap and move around and have these children see that we're all united, it'll be a really, really big lasting impact. So that's my thing to non-teachers and to teachers, because I one day want to open my own school. I think the best thing is remember why you're a teacher. Remember why you're a teacher. And at the end of the day, it's a teacher teaching children, and they are just kids. When I interned, before I taught, I had this lady, man, I forgot her name, but she would always say, they just kids. And I'm like, no, they're fighting. And she's like, they just kids. She'd say it with that Southern drawl like that. And now I still hear that in my head. I'm like, they just kids. So it really makes you more patient. So I just call all teachers to be more compassionate, patient, and more wanting to learn, having that desire to learn the profession and your students.
That's great wisdom.
I'm just going to echo what Sammy said. I don't know that anything needs to be added to that. I don't know that I could say it any better, but absolutely. Yeah.
It's amazing. You, like I said earlier, you guys are rock star teachers, and I'm honored to know you both and honored that you guys came on the show and talked about what you do and how we can help. So thanks so much for being on the show, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. This is great.
Of course. So to our viewers, I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and be sure to come back next week because we have more exciting conversations to have. Bye. Have a great night.